This chair is so squeaky, I need a new one. Hello, lovelies. Ever since TikTok became a thing, it has been a quasi-annual tradition to shit all over it, especially BookTok. And we're at it again. Who am I as a content creator, author, and reader not to jump on this bandwagon? If you're new here, hi, I am C. Emilanji, best known for my online series CaFae Latte, which is getting its own book called Heart of Iron in October. Today we're talking about the most popular criticisms against BookTok and why most of them don't actually make sense. Yes, I am wearing a crown to go with my ensemble because there was an online sale and I have no self-control. Before we get into the actual video, I should give you all a little bit more background because it is important to know any biases that your source of information may have, and I am certainly biased. As I said, I am both an author and content creator. I officially joined TikTok back in 2021 and did BookTok content specifically because I had just signed the contract for my first ever novel, CITADEL, so I figured the best place for me to find an audience willing to read this would be BookTok. However, I eventually pivoted to creating skits, first acting out Tumblr memes and then like Disney movies and fantasy tropes with one of the major characters being a romantic asexual, and all of that eventually accumulated in my CaFae Latte series. However, BookTok is still a very present part of my life and my marketing strategy. It has to be. If I want to sell books, I have to go where the readers are. And I have 2 books coming out this year alone, Heart of Iron and The Witch Who Trades with Death, the latter of which you can pre-order through the link in my description. I'm not going to pretend that social media is all sunshine and roses, but I, for one, am really sick of hearing the same shallow criticisms of BookTok again and again every few months. So here's my rebuttal to the most popular ones. The books aren't even that good. A lot of people who read BookTok's most popular books often point out that the quality of these books are subpar at best, and yeah, welcome to publishing. Publishers do not, nor have they ever, looked for artistic integrity. Ever. Publishers look for what sells. Sometimes what sells is a masterpiece that completely reshapes our cultural experience. Other times, it's tropey trash, like reality television, which is objectively horrible, and yet new shows come out every year because they get views and grow audiences. A perfect example of this type of thing is Iron Widow and its sequel, Heavenly Tyrant. These are incredible books that were #1 New York Times bestsellers, Widow winning or at least being nominated for a dozen awards, and it could not get an American publisher. And that is because, despite the quality of the story and the skill of the author, the publishers did not think that they could sell it. They didn't think it was marketable. That's why it has a Canadian publisher. Now, if that author were to start a new series today, it wouldn't matter if it was trash or as high level as Iron Widow, because now they have a huge social media following. No matter what quality of writing they produce from here on out, people are going to buy it for name recognition alone. That is, unfortunately, the reality of writing. Marketability triumphs over quality. Every time. I personally have found that it is much easier for me to get writing contracts since my social media following ballooned than it was 4 years ago, despite the fact that the quality of my writing hasn't changed all that much. I mean, I've maintained my skill as a writer, obviously, but it's my skill as a marketer that makes me desirable to publishers. There's also the subjectivity of reading itself. Books are art, and thus people's opinions on whether they're good or bad or mid are completely subjective and opinionated. Books that make me cringe are often my best friend's favorite for that year, so of course people are going to disagree on what their favorites are or what constitutes the best or worst books that are recommended to them on social media. I mean, hell, we have whole wars happening within the same fandoms. People whose only commonality is that they really like this one story, possibly too much. Getting into a fist fight over who's the best character or which is the best movie is practically a rite of passage for the Star Wars fandom, and you want uniform opinions across multiple genres and thousands of books? If a BookToker is routinely suggesting books that you don't like or from a genre that you don't read, unfollow them. Because you two clearly have totally different opinions and taste in books, and that's fine. I think that I should also point out that because most readers and book talkers these days are women, they tend to be drawn to books written by other women. Here is some very not subtle marketing, by the way. And it's these books that tend to get railed by all corners of the internet from people who haven't even read them half the time. If they're not bashing the book, then they're bashing the fans of the book. Again, most of them women. That's going to be a theme throughout this video. The books are always smutty. Speaking from a historical perspective, have you read smut from the Age of Enlightenment and Victorian era? That stuff will make modern producers blush. Smutty books have always existed since the dawn of literature, and they've always been popular because a large percentage of the human species are very sexual beings. A lot of us are naturally drawn to that, and unlike a few centuries ago, it is less taboo, it is legal, for now, and thanks to technology, very easily accessible. So of course, a lot of the most popular BookTok books are going to contain that type of content. This is coming from an aromantic asexual. This says seduction resistant, by the way. It's one of my favorite t-shirts. So this is coming from an aromantic asexual who does not read romance, despite my mother being a New York Times bestselling author of romance, and I've also never even touched a Colleen Hoover novel. Smutty books are not inherently bad, and having a plethora of them does not make BookTok bad, although it is a mixed blessing. I have 4 points to make on this one. First off, while a smutty book is probably going to make its way into a top 10 list for most BookTokers, most content creators also push books that are smut-free. Priory of the Orange Tree was all fade to black, and R.F. Kuang's Babel barely had any mention of romance, never mind sex. Personally, I thought that Priory's biggest issue was that it was 3 books in a trench coat. It really should have been a trilogy, like 3, 4, maybe even 5 novels, especially for the back half. And Babel, no notes. Perfect novel. And that's why I hate R.F. Kuang, because she is 1 year younger than me and already has 5 bestsellers. Bitch. However, an argument can be made that there is a little too much romance and smut in all stories across all media. As an aro ace, it's really easy to spot just how obsessed with love and sex you all are as a society. I'd say you need to find Jesus, but 1, I'm a Buddhist, and 2, the Jesus freaks are the freakiest freaks. This takes me to point number 2. The smutification of BookTok is not a cause. It's a symptom. You see it all over fiction, a little more on that later, and in real life. I mean, how many of us who are single have been asked when we're going to find someone and settle down every time we show up without a date? How many of us, when we were 5 or 6, made friends with kids of the opposite sex and were immediately asked by the adults around us if that was our boyfriend or girlfriend? An attitude, by the way, persists into adulthood. I mean, men are straight up shamed for not getting laid every week, and women are still told to this day that their wedding day is going to be the most important day of their life, even if they get a PhD and cure cancer. It's everywhere. Because of that, point number 3, as a writer, there is definitely pressure from editors, publishers, and fans to add romance to whatever story we're writing, regardless of target audience or theme or genre. And if that story is marketed to adults specifically, there's often also a bit of pressure to make that romance spicy to get that smut money. I mean, hell, you even see this in action-adventure movies that are explicitly targeted toward men and have nothing to do with romance, and yet they always have a romantic subplot, usually in as little clothing as the producers can get away with. And this is because A, I mean, how else are they going to get the opportunity to sexualize and objectify a woman? B, romance and sex are universal, so they must universally be in every single story. And C, producers think that romance is the only way to draw women viewers, which is patently untrue. We didn't show up to Wonder Woman for her romance with Chris Pine. We showed up to watch Diana Prince beat up a bunch of Germans. It's not the romance we're after, it's the well-rounded, fleshed-out, three-dimensional women characters who end the story happy. Fourth, smut created by and for men has not received nearly this kind of vitriol. I mean, Quentin Tarantino puts his foot fetish in every single movie. A Song of Ice and Fire has more explicit sex than most romance novels on the market. And whole legions of stories by and for men have objectified and sexualized women to ridiculous, unnecessary degrees. And while there is pushback, not to this extent. But as soon as we get a mode of storytelling that's typically by and for women and centers on women's pleasure and fantasies, it's the end of American morality. Grow up. The books are always uninventive and repetitive. Say it with me now. Publishers do not care about quality. They only care about what sells. They are a business. Their job is to make money. So of course they're going to publish and push books with the same basic stereotypes and archetypes as previous bestsellers. That's what they know is going to sell. They're going to hesitate to take risks on anything new, even if it is objectively well written. The movie industry does the same thing, by the way. I mean, why do you think Hallmark is so successful despite every single movie being the exact same movie? Or why Disney is remaking perfect classics instead of underrated, lesser-known movies like Atlantis that just need a little bit of a polish. It's because they know that those classic stories are going to sell, regardless of the quality and unoriginality of the remake. More importantly, the problem of repetitive storytelling, which is real, I'm not going to deny that, is way older than BookTok. I hate to say this because she's a fucking TERF, but remember when Harry Potter came out? Alright, it wasn't the first story to center around a weird magic school, but it was the first to blow up. Suddenly, every other book in the middle grade and YA section is about a kid who goes to magic school. Same thing happened when vampire romances got big, accumulating in Twilight. And oh my god, The Hunger Games was single-handedly responsible for every single YA dystopia novel of my teenage years. Publishers saw what was blowing up and prioritized those kinds of books. Authors either wanted to ride the coattails of the bestsellers and or were genuinely inspired by those stories, and so they wrote a ton of copycats. And all of this happened years, decades before TikTok became a thing. Guys, your beef is not with BookTok. It is with the publishing industry and possibly capitalism. Speaking of which, BookTok promotes the overconsumption of books. We live in a capitalist society. Literally every single industry has an overconsumption problem. Clothing, makeup, hair products, crowns, Legos, action figures, toilet paper. Anyone into any of those has been pushed to hoard as much as possible for ultra-specific occasions or to prove their love of the brand. Books just happen to take up more space. I just realized that a lot of the most obvious demonized examples of this are industries specifically geared toward women, specifically our appearance. I feel like there's a thesis in there about how sexism works with capitalism, most notably in the beauty industry, to encourage women to spend more money, which we have less of than our male counterparts due to the wage gap, to cater to men's desires rather than funding things that will help us get rid of the patriarchy. But I'm not in the mood, I need to do more research, and also, that's not the point of this video. Like every industry, there are those few who buy way too much of a certain product, and because that is an outlier, they get way more attention than the vast majority of book lovers who tend to be a little more conscious of their budget. Those of us who forget the concept of a budget as soon as we walk into a Barnes & Noble have always existed. Alright, people splurge on what gives them joy. In my case, it's books. In my brother's, video games. My high school best friend, art supplies. And how many guys have been pushed to buy dozens of different building tools, and they've only used, like, the hammer, the Phillips head, and the flathead twice in 5 years. Publishers and booksellers, of course, do everything in their power to encourage book buying so they can make more money. They always have, they always will. Social media just makes that easier and more obvious. Again, it's a capitalism thing, not a BookTok thing. Even without that, owning books is a goal for a lot of readers, myself included. They've always been a status symbol ever since literacy became a thing. We enjoy rereading particularly favorite books, so having them on hand is always nice. And full bookshelves are great for interior decorating. I would certainly look a lot classier right now if I had positioned my desk and camera in front of my bookshelves, which I used to do, but that does not work with the floor plan. But let's set all of that aside for now. Let me talk about this specifically as a content creator, my job is to deliver entertaining content for my audience as often as possible. That is how I earn my paycheck and pay my bills. Creators learn very early that we have to produce as much as possible just to be heard amid the sea of everyone else doing the same thing. The general rule of thumb is you want to upload at least once a week on YouTube, a few times a week on Instagram, and once a day on TikTok. That's a lot of content. If your content specifically has to do with books, you need to read a lot of them in order to meet that demand. And might I recommend these two? They're linked in the description. Now, libraries and thrift stores do exist, and I highly encourage everyone to use them. The publishing industry won't, because they don't get as much money from those outlets, and neither do I as the author. But if that's the only way that you can access my work, or even if you just prefer that for budgeting or any other reason, do it. I had a library event a couple of weeks ago and another one in December. They were both really fun. Anyway, a good book talker will talk about a lot of different books that they have read in order to fill their quota, so to speak, regardless of how they got their hands on those books. Wholesale, thrifted, free on Kindle Unlimited, sent by publishers who want them to review their work as part of the marketing strategy. Their viewers are going to see that they have read and probably own a lot of books. And when they see that, they're going to feel pressured to do the same, or else they're not a real bookworm. It's a monkey see, monkey do type of problem. We want what others have, and we want to fit in with the group. This does feed into the idea that you have to read a certain number of books every year, or else you're not a real bookworm, an idea that has been around for a while, and that I'm also relieved to see has been getting more and more pushback. I honestly think Goodreads might be a bigger contributor to this problem, since that's the platform that publicizes everyone's reading goals, so we all see how many books you're aiming for and whether or not you succeed, which puts unnecessary pressure on the reader, stressing them out and sucking the fun out of their favorite pastime. I used to do book goals, but I very quickly stopped because of these issues, long before I joined TikTok. All right, no one needs to know the exact number of books I read every year, or even what they are, and that attitude is gaining ground, thankfully. So the overconsumption argument, that does hold some water, but it's much bigger than Booktok and older, and frankly, if you have to choose a product to spend too much money on, books don't even make the list of worst choices. Just make sure you can still pay rent and, have enough room to store all those books. The book aesthetic is more important than actually reading. Ah, a classic. This specific argument was popularized by an article in the British GQ. In the shallow world of Booktok, being a reader is more important than actually reading. The viral article criticized Booktok creators for putting up the facade of being a bookworm without actually reading the books, or at best, skimming and doing shallow reads. This one, it used to make me laugh because it's so absurd. But it actually became a little more credible with the 2024 election, during and after which many booktalkers complained about politics in book spaces and claimed that Booktok isn't political, don't make it political. So, definitely people who voted for Trump. And then they'll say that their favorite series growing up was The Hunger Games. I won't claim that they did not read all of those books that explicitly tackled cultural and political issues that have become so important these days, but point definitely went over their heads. It's like those Star Wars fanboys who really love the rebellion and Luke Skywalker and all that stuff, and then also voted for Trump. And that's not even touching on the book talker who said she skips paragraphs and only reads dialogue and action, or the one who complained about too many words on the page. I'm pretty sure this is more of a failure of the American education system than anything else. However, what proponents of the aesthetic argument fail to see is the reaction to those few book talkers. All of the comments, the counter videos, there was so much backlash within the Booktok community to this anti-intellectualism and idea of no politics in reading. I personally saw so many videos from content creators, big and small, calling out those original creators for their foolishness, citing the act of reading itself as political, especially if you're a woman or a person of color, and recommending books that are definitely political. And by the way, those book recs, not a whole lot of smut. Booktok is ruining literature. what does this even mean? I mean, if the argument is BookTok is bringing down the overall quality of books, I'm gonna have to refute you. Again, all things are subjective, but there's been plenty of bangers put out in the last 5 years. I think the people who make this point are seeing that there is a higher quantity of books published and promoted every year, both banger and bleh, and are focusing on the bleh. They're so focused on the number of low-quality books that are rising that they don't pay attention to the number of high-quality books that are also rising. The more books that are published, the more you're going to get both. That's how math and percentages work. If the argument is BookTok is ruining how people read and interact with books, that's got a little more weight, but I already talked about this. It ties in with the overconsumption argument, the idea that we have to purchase and then read as many books as possible, which encourages skimming, which leads to more shallow reads. But this is rarely a problem that sticks to anyone other than some of the most dedicated BookTok creators who make money off of their content and so feel real financial pressure to read as much as possible. And even then, because their job depends on giving in-depth reviews, they have to choose between skimming a ton of books and providing shallow reviews versus actually reading them. Obviously, as we've seen, some people do go the skimming route, but people on BookTok, especially the content creators, are there because they love reading and engaging with the text, and that alone discourages the skimming problem. So this is where I have to bring up the woman thing again, because women readers and authors have been blamed for ruining literature since we started to get taught to read en masse alongside men and boys 400 years ago. And ever since then, every time a reading or writing trend has come up that favors or is favored by women, there's this whole moral panic where women are blamed for ruining books and books are blamed for ruining women. It was less than 200 years ago that American women could be institutionalized in actual insane asylums, which were basically rundown prisons. And yes, I say insane asylums, not mental health facilities, because they did nothing for your mental health. And they were sent there just for reading books other than the Bible. The hate for women and our passion for reading runs deep, and the whole BookTok hate is just another aspect of it. BookTok is not going away. It is here to stay. And my final argument is that the majority of problems people have with it are problems that are wider and have roots far deeper than social media. Anyway, be sure to like and subscribe, and if you want any of my books, they are linked in the description. The Witcher Trades with Death is the only one with smut. Bye, lovelies.